Hey guys, how is everybody? Welcome to Community Conversation. And I'm sorry you're going to hear a little bit of background noise until I get my 3-year-old. You gotta love live. You gotta love live. Okay. You don't want to go down. Okay. Can you say hello to everybody? Hi. Say bye. Okay. Can you go with your sister? Go with your sister and go get some ice cream?
I'll get some.
Yeah.
No, I want the cutting in the freezer.
Okay, well go get some at the freezer. So bribery still works and you guys see my life. That's why I'm a work-life integration strategist because anything happens in the Divine household when you have a 3-year-old and you got to go live. So anyway, so back to everything. Good evening, everybody. Hi, Catherine Adams. I see you are on. Those of you who are on, please share this because we certainly want everyone to hear this amazing conversation. Okay, well, go get some at the freezer. Thank you guys for joining us. I am Councilwoman Tameika Isaac Devine. Welcome to another episode of Community Conversations. These conversations actually got started in light of coronavirus. When we were under stay-at-home orders, everybody was home, and there were a lot of topics, and people were talking about a lot of things. There were a lot of things on my mind. And so I decided to start this as an opportunity, just really kind of to talk about what we were experiencing and what we were going through as a community. But you guys really loved it, and I appreciate that. And people kept saying, well, what about this and what about that? And so I realized that this was an amazing opportunity and platform to share very important topics that sometimes don't get, they don't get top billing on the news. They don't get a lot of information. They don't get a lot of attention, but they're so very important to the quality of life that we all have and the responsibility that we all have. And so I want to challenge you guys, in addition to sharing it so that other people can hear this conversation, I also want you to challenge you that as you are listening to this conversation, y'all know me, those of you who have followed me, those of you who follow me, those of you who this is the first time you have followed me, I thank you so much. And I hope you follow us and watch some more. But those of you who know me know I'm very action oriented. I understand that we have to talk about and identify problems, but I'm always challenged to say, what can we do? Everybody has an opportunity to do something. It doesn't matter who you are, where you are. We all can do something. And so I always want people that as you listen to the conversations that we have in community conversation, to also think about you personally and what is the action item that you can take. So at the end of this, I hope that you guys identify 1, 2, maybe 5 things that you decide you want to do, even if it is continuing the conversation, if it is donating and supporting a great organization, if it is learning more about this important topic, because I will tell you this topic, it's not gonna do justice in an hour. We really could honestly, Dr. Bustles, we could have a year-long series on this topic because it is just so important and it touches so many things. So anyway, if you could just continue the conversation, that'd be great. So anyway, tonight we are going to talk about creating equitable communities where all kids can thrive. And when I shared that topic and I said kids can thrive, my husband was like, well, what about everyone else? And I said, and I said, but I believe if kids are thriving, then of course families thrive. And when families thrive, our entire community thrives. And so we're all interconnected. But sometimes children don't have the options to do the things that we as adults can do. And so I want to talk about how we can create equitable communities where kids can thrive. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about the fact that we actually can talk about a lot of things here, and we probably will. We're going to hit on lots of different things. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, and we'll try and get to your questions. But I'm excited about this because, and I will say that Aditi and I met really by chance.
Yeah.
We were actually probably supposed to meet before because we have so many things in common, so many friends in common. And I was looking through my text messages, and realized that our mutual friend China Phillips, who was my intern a few years ago, and is now over at Sisters of Charity, and is the chairwoman of the Columbia's Complete Count Committee to help with the census. She actually shared that we should meet, and this was like before you and I met. But we met by accident because we were both scheduled to be on a radio talk show to talk about coronavirus and the disparities as it relates to coronavirus. And Aditi got, it was a great mistake. And I say, and nothing happens, everything happens for a reason. So it really wasn't a mistake. But she called in a day early. It was my day to be on the show. And so the host was like, well, come on, you both talk. And we just had an amazing conversation. And from that conversation, I said, we need to continue this conversation. And so I'd love to get you on my community conversation show so we could talk about these issues in a different platform. So that is kind of how this came up. Mm-hmm. And I'm excited that she is here. So I don't want to take too much time because we're already 6 minutes into our hour, but I do want, for those of you, and so Aditi, you're going to have to help me because I should have done this beforehand, and help me because I know that your professional last name is different than what I usually call you.
Yeah,
so
I transition
the last name for me.
So it's Aditi Srivastav.
Aditi Srivastav.
Oh, yep.
That sounds so elegant. It sounds so elegant.
Thank you.
But she is the director of research at Children's Trust of South Carolina, and she leads mixed methods research efforts on adverse childhood experiences, what we call ACEs, race equity, community mobilization, and public opinion to improve family and community resilience. Her research has been published in several well-respected peer-reviewed journals, and recently she was awarded the Jim Clyburn Health Equity Emerging Leader Award for her research efforts. Congratulations, that's awesome. In her role, she oversees the South Carolina ACE Initiative and Kids Count South Carolina, which those of you hopefully know about Kids Count. And if you don't, we hopefully need to touch on that as well, in which she directs all data dissemination and translates research for organizational strategy, community action, and social change. And that is really what we're about, community action and social change. She's on the Columbia's Complete Count Committee that I mentioned earlier, and serves at leadership in Empower SC, which is a new organization. And hopefully we'll kind of bring that in a little bit so you can tell everybody what Empower SC is. And most recently, she was selected to serve as a board member of Columbia Opportunity Resource. She received her PhD from the University of South Carolina and an undergraduate degree from the University of Virginia. So y'all, I don't have my little claps here, but y'all help me welcome. And so I kept saying Aditi, so I got your first name wrong and your last name wrong.
That's okay. Aditi, yes.
Aditi.
Yes.
Aditi. So thank you so much for being here. And like I said, I'm really excited to have you. And we've got several folks here. So thank you, guys who are on. And I appreciate you. If you are just joining on, remember I said earlier, please share this so more people can be part of this conversation. So Aditi, let's start first. We're going to get real knee deep as knee deep as we can about equity issues. But I really want you first to talk a little bit about Children's Trust, because I don't know if many people know what Children's Trust is and the vast amount of stuff that you do. As I mentioned to you before, when I think of Children's Trust, I think about the pinwheels that we would do in April. And that was like all I kind of, my only interaction, and the Kids Count, of course. But tell us a little bit about Children's Trust, specifically, what do you do for them?
Sure. So I really like that you mentioned that while this discussion touches on kids, a lot of it will touch on just community in general. So for those of you that are on here, you will all learn something, I promise. So Children's Trust of South Carolina, we are a statewide agency headquartered in Columbia, but we are statewide. So we have staff actually remote all over the state. And we're focused on the prevention of child abuse and neglect. So the pinwheels that Tameika was mentioning are actually part of our awareness campaign that we do every April for Child Abuse Prevention Month. So when we were actually legislated into an organization, we didn't know a lot about abuse and neglect, right? We often thought about it as these extreme cases that hit the news, and it's horrible, and we have to do something about it. Over the last 25 years, as research and public health has really embraced this idea that prevention is not just the child welfare system's responsibility or the responsibility of the community, but really this collective effort, we've also learned a lot about how abuse and neglect occur. And that's really where a lot of science around early childhood development, a lot around health disparities, systemic inequities, and most importantly, or most recently, this idea of ACEs has come into play. So now that is also reflective in our organization. We've expanded tremendously over the last several years, and where we fund several programs across the state that promote positive parenting and strong families. But now we also are leading coalitions across the state focused on child well-being, family well-being, racial equity, and addressing disparities in health for South Carolinians. And then with that, we are also unique in that we have in-house research and evaluation expertise. So most of the time, nonprofits may work with a university or with a think tank to do all of that research and evaluation. But I think Children's Trust really recognized that in order for us to do things well, we need to do them from a data-driven perspective. And so that's where I came into play. So I was really lucky to have the support of our senior leadership to create this position where I lead all of our research efforts focused around topics that can strengthen our programs, but then also provide our community partners with information they need as they are advocating for policy change or discussing ways in which they want to apply for a grant or mobilizing people to change things in their community. So as director of research, I don't just do research in the more traditional sense that we may think of in the university setting, but I also get to do a lot of work with community members and have these important conversations. And I think that's the most rewarding part of my job.
Wow. Awesome. Awesome. So you and I talked about this before, but I gotta say, and people who watch me know I talk about this a lot. But I want to ask you, a lot of people think about equity and equality, and they think of them, they use it interchangeably. I believe they're different. I believe you believe they're different.
Yes.
But from your standpoint, what is your definition of equity, and what is the difference between equity and equality?
So we're seeing that a lot right now, right? People talking about how coronavirus, for example, the pandemic is shedding light on a lot of disparities, or sometimes people will say inequalities. And so I think that it's important for us to understand that inequalities are actually a consequence of inequity. So the way that I like to describe this is think about equality as getting the same thing. So all of us, we need pairs of shoes. So we are all given a size 9 sneaker. Okay, so we all know that we're all different and we're probably not all a size 9 sneaker, but we were equal, right? We gave everybody the same exact shoe, same size. And so that's what equality is. But when we think about the history of our country and the ways in which policies were created, equality isn't enough. That's really where equity comes into play, or this idea that we give people what they need. So in my case, maybe I like wearing heels, and that's what I like to wear every day, and that's what I need. Where Tameika maybe just needs the size 9 sneakers, or maybe somebody else is a child and they need something that's a much smaller size that they're able to get rid of easily as they grow over time. And so that's a very kind of, I think, simplified definition, but it really helps me in explaining what we mean by that. It's not always just about giving the same thing, because communities are already disproportionately being affected by a lot of systemic problems that we see. And so it's important for us to give communities what they need. And so I challenge people to really think about using the term equity and inequality very intentionally. I think what you are seeing with the coronavirus pandemic, and I would even say with some of the police violence protests, is a protest in terms of inequity, not necessarily inequality. Again, oftentimes you may hear the term inequality used in terms of wealth. But those inequalities or the unequal wealth that we see among families of color compared to white families is coming from systemic inequities like redlining or or that's an example of racial residential segregation for those that may not know, or educational inequities, right? So the ways in which our public schools are funded. So again, inequities are really what cause those inequalities.
Yeah, that's a great way to explain it, very simplified, because it's interesting. And I always tell people, like, so as a policymaker, you get people and say, well, why did this group get this versus this group getting this? It should be equal. And, equal sounds fair, but it's the way, you got to figure out where people are. If I'm coming to the table with different, from a different place, with different life experiences, with a different background, I wasn't given the same type of things. And generationally, over the years, that tends to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Then you're not giving, one area the same thing that one group the same thing that another group has, or one area the same thing that another group has, still may not address the problem, because you're not exactly what you said, giving what they need. So that's big. And I think that a lot of people want to understand the difference. And I think more people now are starting to understand the difference. But until we understand the difference, sometimes it's hard to figure out kind of what needs to happen next. Because if you're saying, well, let's just treat everybody equal, you can't do that. And you start treating everybody equal, but up to this point, they're starting at different places. You're not going to get the same result, or the desired result. And so we need to understand that. So, so I love the way you described that. So you brought up coronavirus, and I talk about that a lot. I mean, I think with coronavirus, we really saw inequity in action. From the health disparities, you keep saying, that every day when they say who has died, or who's, severely ill with COVID-19, it's someone with an underlying health condition. Well, you think about the underlying health conditions and wonder, well, why is COVID-19 hitting communities of color in it more drastically than it is than white communities? Well, a lot of it has to do with those health disparities, because they have underlying health conditions. Then, when school shut down and kids went home, and it was like, okay, well, all kids will start e-learning. Well, not everybody can e-learn, because not everybody has access to broadband. Not everyone has the equipment to even e-learn. As basic as that, not everybody even has, because our essential workers, our food workers, our hospital workers, others, those parents still had to go to work. Then you had some kids who were sent home, challenged to e-learn, and they didn't even have the support because their parents were having to work. So there were so many inequities that I think we saw it real time during coronavirus. And so I'm just wondering, from your standpoint, and especially from what you do, what are some of the things that stood out to you most as far as the inequities that we have in the community that may or may not have been highlighted through the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah. So I will say I was actually quite impressed by the questions that the public began asking. So a term that I've been using a lot is I've been kind of cautiously optimistic that the coronavirus is really shedding light on, first, how important public health is and what it is. It's very weird to me to finally be able to say, I work in public health, and people are like, oh, I think I know what that is. But it also has had people really delving into looking at issues more systemically, right? Not just blaming the individual, which is often what we see in terms of health behaviors, right? And public health research has shown time and time again that our behaviors are absolutely influenced by the context around us. And oftentimes those contexts are also affected by inequities that exist. So one thing that really stood out to me was who was considered an essential worker during this time. And when we think about some of the quote higher paying or more socially prestigious jobs, those didn't end up being the essential workers on the ground that were really carrying a lot of basic goods and needs, and carrying those businesses in a time when things were just, there's no precedent for it. And I think that a lot of essential workers were not given adequate protections. They were not being paid or compensated for the high risk environments they were being put in. And then most importantly, they did not have the flexibility that people like me may have had, where we were able to work from home, or for some of my friends that have kids that were given a little bit of grace that they are going to be dealing with childcare at home while trying to do their job, right? And so that really stood out to me, because when you actually take a look at how the essential workforce became what it is, it goes back to, again, all of these inequities along the way across the lifespan. So when we think about a community that's not been invested in, the first thing I think of is not having access to a high quality education. And if you don't have access to a high quality education, you're limited in your economic opportunities. You're limited in what you can be, who you can be. And as a result, that's often some of the ways in which taking on some of these more hourly wage jobs end up happening. And now if we want to add the lens of, and this is another thing I hope that people take away from this, we cannot talk about equity without talking about race. Race is often the elephant in the room. People don't want to talk about it, but it would be a real disservice for us to not talk about racism and race in terms of equity, for us to move forward and do something about it. So I always encourage you, while there's different types of inequities, of course, whether it's rural, urban, gender inequities, age inequities, et cetera, we know that that is really what has been historically what a lot of our inequities have been centered around. And so I think that was one piece that really, I think, stuck out to me, was that it really showed the trajectory of how inequity plays out over time. And I do appreciate that it was covered fairly well in terms of media and I would say local news sources, but I'm not sure if always that kind of life course perspective was taken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. CNN did a special, actually, I think they've done it twice now, and I might be about to do it again, but it was called The Color of COVID. Mm-hmm. And it talked a lot about the racial inequities and health disparities, and how, if you think, again, going back to even investments in the community, when you have, redlining that ended up segregating communities, and then you had no investment in that community, no grocery stores, no access to fresh fruits and vegetables, no sidewalks, how those then actually transcend into lower health outcomes, not as good health outcomes for people who live in that community. And so then when you think about that generationally, over time, you end up having it. And I think that that's really important. And I have to say that, although, and you and I kind of talked about this before, when we had our conversation a few weeks ago, but the last month and a half has been just a crazy emotional roller coaster for me, with all the different hats that I wear and having to deal with things. But, first and foremost, I'm a Black woman. And, but I have to say that in the last month and a half, even with everything, that is the thing that's just been the best, that I can say I'm a Black woman and people get it, as opposed to, quite honestly, sometimes I would say things and people were like, well, why are you just talking about Black people? Why are you just talking about women? And it was to the point where it was like, well, everything should be equal. And, but it's kind of like my experiences, the lens that I bring to my experiences as a Black woman are different, and it's just real. It's real. And so, that's the enlightening part about all this.
Yeah.
But so to talk about that, and that's why I really kind of like that now we're finally kind of talking about action items and what can everybody do to make sure that we are creating better outcomes for families, particularly Black families, particularly, and making sure that Black children are supported. So so kind of with all the things that you have, like your research, your experience, going back to kind of the subject here about how do we create equitable communities where all kids can thrive? What are some of the things that I guess you see? I'm going to take it 2 point. What are some of the things that you see that kind of are positive, like people are paying attention to now that may be positive for us to be able to create those outcomes? And then what are some of the things that still people aren't getting or that you wish people would know or understand so that we could all be part of creating those successful outcomes?
So I think that it's been, again, going back to, I really like that you shared that, that has been your experience in terms of being able to really lead with your identity. And that has been really an optimistic experience for me, similarly as well. So I think that it's that people are listening in terms of what experts are saying, what researchers have been saying in terms of why we have a lot of these social issues. People want to learn. The fact that, for example, anti-racist was one of the top bestsellers for the New York Times recently. Like that, people want to learn, they want to grow, they want to expand their thinking, and I love that. And we also see that in terms of how people are also thinking about community solutions for problems that maybe before this pandemic would have been seen as an individual problem. So one example I would say is how much we've started to see schools being used as a vehicle for providing different types of unrelated supports to families and kids, whether it's providing them with a lunch, whether it's providing them to access to broadband, whether it's providing mental health services. We're starting to see people be like, all right, everybody needs to help out because we all benefit when that happens. And that type of mentality is what we want to try and promote, because that is true. If every community in South Carolina is thriving, we all win. As a result of that. And so I've loved seeing that in research. We call those things protective factors. So we've really seen a uptake of people wanting to promote these universal protective factors for everyone in their city or their community, and are willing to kind of take that extra time to do that. But again, I think that one of the things that is going to continue to be a struggle, and something that I've certainly struggled with, is how and I'm sure that as a policymaker, you can really see this, how things that are for social good and social change become so divisive and political. And so for me, it's really trying to figure out the right words to get everybody at the table, because I do believe that people ultimately want a strong, resilient South Carolina, regardless of where they're coming from. And so that will continue to be, I think, an obstacle when it comes to changing some of our approaches to how we are helping kids and families. So, one of the examples that I like to talk about, so in the kids count data that was just released a couple of days ago, we actually dropped 3 spots in terms of child well-being. We went from 39 to 41. Granted, this is data that was collected before COVID. I think it's safe to assume that these trends will probably just be exacerbated by this pandemic. So one of the areas we continue to struggle in is education. So over 70% of our 4th graders and about 70% of our 8th graders are not reading and math proficient. That's a huge number. And so, of course, some of the education has been a hot topic at the State House, and people have looked at different ways in which to address it. I think the hard part is going to be really getting people to understand that this isn't a student issue and this isn't a parent issue. This is a community issue. Let's look at how schools have been funded for years. Let's look at, the ways in which neighborhoods have been invested in. And then that's where you're going to really start to see some of those systems things come into play. So I know that's a very long answer, but those are some of the things I've been thinking about.
No, but I mean, that's no, it wasn't a long answer. I mean, it was perfect because it's those things that we have to all think about, and how do we all, play a role. And I've shared this story before with folks, but I'm always reminded of it. But if I have to think about, and I've been on council for a while now, and I'm in my 18th year of serving. And I had to think, even over the 18 years, if I had to think about kind of one of the biggest things that kind of has shaped my life in service, and some of the things is, it was like very early on, my first or second year of being in office, and we had a shooting in T.S. Martin Park, or the neighborhood, and two young kids were killed. Courtney Dixon and Terrence Merchant. And I always say, I'm always going to say their names so that people don't ever forget them. And there was a huge, outcrying from the community, as should be. And people were surrounding these families. I still keep in touch with Courtney's family to this day. Her brother came over here just the other day. But there was a huge outpouring for the families. And JT McLaughlin from the Columbia Urban League called me, and he said, would you mind meeting with the shooter's mom? He said, everybody is reaching out to these other families, and as they should. He said, but she needs, I just would love for you to sit down and talk with her. And so I did, and I met with her. And, I told her, I said, no judgment here. I said, but I really would just love to ask, because her son was 17. So the young man who shot these other children was a child himself. And I asked her, I said, I said, what happened? Do you have any kind of semblance of what happened? And she said, I'm just going to be honest with you, Miss Devine. She said, I'm a single mom. She said, I have several children. And she said, things would happen, and he would get in trouble at school, and he would get kicked out of school, and I had to work. And so she said, so I, would leave him home and say, stay home. But, you tell a kid, stay home. He doesn't stay home. He'd get out. And the more and more he got out, he got targeted by the gangs. He started, selling drugs, and then it just escalated and escalated. And she said, and I had other children in the house, and I had to make a choice. And she said, it might not have been the right choice, but I had to tell him he couldn't be here. And, my heart just really went out to her, because I was thinking that this system, this community failed that mom.
Yep.
We failed her because, what do we expect people to work and, take care of their kids, and, and there are no supports. There was nothing to help keep that kid in school. There was nothing, if he couldn't stay in school at a certain point, there was no alternative school for him to go to at the time. I mean, now the school system is a little bit better with alternative schools, but still, it's not as much. I mean, that out of school time is so critical, but parents have to work. And so what can we do? And so, over the years, we've worked on different things within the system, but I give that as just one example, but there's so many other examples where we as a community, we fail families. And we want to, I think you said it so right when you were talking about education. It's like, it's bigger than a child issue or a parent issue, it's a community issue. And I hear people, sometimes not meaning to, but I hear people sometimes will say, well, they should be reading to their children, or they should be doing this and they should be doing that. And we have no idea. We're not walking in those shoes. We as a community need to have different outlets. And so that's one of the things that I hope that we think about when we think about inequality, and that this family may need something completely different than this family over here. One is not more important than the other. They're just different. And so how do we give this family and this woman the support that she needs, and give this family and this community the support that they need as well? But recognizing that it may look different and it may cost different as far as community investment. So
and the thing about that is, that investment will yield such good benefits in the long term, that while it may feel a little bit, well, this isn't equal, but it's equitable. The benefits that you get is worth it. And it's those types of discussions, I think, that are important to have. I did want to point out the story that you told, for those of you that may be on here that aren't familiar. What she described was a child that had experienced probably a lot of ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. It was never about the mom not trying to do the best that she could, because most parents try to do the best that they can with what they have. And so when we think about even the ways in which we discipline and respond to a child that may have experienced ACEs, that's an area where things can change. So we know that Black children are much more likely to be suspended or expelled from school for this very same behavior that a white child may do and just may get a slap on their wrist about for. And those are examples of inequities that we could address without policy change. That's just a organizational commitment from a school or district to say, we're going to take a more compassionate approach to the ways in which we interact with students. And so one of the things that I like to talk about, it's not that a child's behavior, whether they're acting out or not responding at all, there's no such thing as maladaptive. It's just simply adapting the best way they know how. So if you are a child growing up in a home where, mom has to work, she's a single mom, and you know that in order for you to get your needs met, that there's a certain type of behavior that works, that's what you're going to use because you're in constant survival mode, right? And we also know that if you're in constant survival mode, you're activating your stress response, and we're not supposed to be in a stressful state for more than 20 minutes at a time. That's where you also start to see a lot of that early childhood development be disrupted. And so again, it's taking that very life course perspective to understand that all of the things that we're seeing play out are generational. They're across the lifespan. They're things that we can really change from a community perspective. It can start by changing your shift in how you think about problems occur, and then you can also start by thinking about the ways in which people cope and respond to hard situations. The great part is that same science tells us that while it can disrupt your early childhood development and maybe make you want to engage with unhealthy substances like alcohol or smoking at a young age, we also know that the second that you have someone who just cares about you in your life, whether it's a coach, a teacher, and someone that isn't willing to give up on you, you can actually reverse the effects of those traumatic experiences and help that child thrive as if they didn't happen. And that to me that's the promise. That's the hope. That's how we do what we do. That's why we want social change, is that we know we can make a difference.
That's great. I don't want to run out of time, so I've got a couple more questions, but I'm going to tell, we've got some great comments. I'm trying to put them all up and give equal time to everybody. But if any of you guys who are commenting, I love how engaged you guys are. So remember, again, share this so other people can hear this great conversation. But also, if you have any questions, put them in the chat, and we will make sure that we address those questions. But so let's talk about, you explained it, but that was one of the questions I did want to ask about ACEs, because, that has been, from my experience, fairly new that people are actually recognizing that that's a thing. I think in the past, people just didn't, would think, oh, that kid's just bad or comes from a bad home or whatever, but they don't realize that there are things that the child experiences at a young age that, because of those adverse childhood experiences, that may result in other issues later on. And I will say just one thing, and I for another community conversation, guys, and I hope that you guys join in that. I don't have the date yet. I plan to have our police chief for the city of Columbia to come on and talk, not about defunding police, not about police violence, but about the programs that we do have at the Columbia Police Department. Because one thing I've noticed through this conversation, there's so many things that the CPD is doing that people don't know. But one of the things that Columbia Police Department is doing is they have a program called Handle with Care, which is if there is a law enforcement interaction in a home where there is a child, they immediately talk with the school and let them know this happened, just so this, number one, so the school's aware, so that if the child is acting out at school, if the child is sleepy that day, if there's other things that they handle that child with care, that they understand that there's some other things going on there. And then there can also be some other supports put around that child that has been in that involvement, whether, there was a domestic violence incident, there was an arrest, whatever. If there's any interaction with that home, they know. The program has not been in place that long, but one thing that I know from talking to our police chief is now that school was out, there wasn't that extra layer, I guess, of support there. But and it's critical because you think about something, we as adults, something that's traumatic for us, just imagine how traumatic it is for children. And so, the police was talking the police chief would call me a couple times and say, we had this incident happen. Do you know who I could call? And I know Regina Williams is on. I know she was aware of this situation. We had a situation where there was a murder, and there were like kids who were outside and saw this murder. And, we were talking about how do we get somebody to, reach out to those children and make sure that, they've seen it. But, you're getting to this point where they're experiencing this. So can we talk a little bit about kind of what is Children's Trust doing as far as research and the effects of ACEs? And what are some of the things that you believe that the community needs to, A, be aware of, but number two, even act to try and make sure that we have the supports in the community to be there for those children so that these experiences aren't as detrimental long-term for them?
So I could do an entire 1 hour training on what ACEs are, but the kind of quick and dirty is that ACEs refer to adverse childhood experiences. So they are experiences that occur before the age of 18 when a lot of crucial brain development occurs, that activate what we call toxic stress. So this is not the type of stress that we have when we're stuck in traffic or like have a test to take, right? This is that unrelenting stress that no caregiver is being able to buffer for you. And so what ends up happening is that it activates your stress response to the point that, and they use this term a lot this metaphor a lot in a lot of the ACE trainings, that you are so stressed out that you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a real tiger and a paper tiger. So there's a documentary called Paper Tiger that I highly recommend people watch if they want to learn more. Children's Trust provides those screenings for free, and we can also do a facilitated discussion afterwards. So I'm happy to get that set up for you. And so because of that toxic stress, we know through a lot of research that we've also done with data in South Carolina that we actually can see that increases risk of engaging in unhealthy behaviors, which then we know, of course, that if you're doing unhealthy things, it's going to lead to chronic health outcomes. So in South Carolina, about 60% of South Carolinians have experienced ACEs, and that's pretty consistent with the national average as well as North Carolina and Georgia. So it's pretty common across demographics and across populations. So if there's one thing that I would also want you to take away from the ACEs conversation is it's not just that community or those people that experience trauma. Trauma can be universal and it can happen in any family. But we do know that there may be certain types of ACEs. So ACEs fall under three major categories. You have your abuse type, your neglect types, and then dysfunction in the household and in the community. So that would be things like witnessing domestic violence, witnessing community violence, being homeless in childhood, being food insecure in childhood, having someone in your home that has mental illness, or maybe has a substance use dependency. So those are some of those factors that aren't happening directly to the child, but the child is witnessing and has the same effect as essentially experiencing abuse or neglect. And so it's those experiences that essentially over time, the more of those experiences you have, the higher your risk for poor health outcomes. And so we've done research taking a look at connecting it to physical health, mental health, healthcare access. So you're less likely to have health insurance as well as a regular checkup or access to healthcare when you've experienced a lot of ACEs. And then, of course, also chronic conditions, obesity, heart disease, kidney disease. This is not to say that those conditions are, if you have those conditions or know someone that has them, that they experienced ACEs for sure. We just know that there's a very, very strong correlation between early childhood experiences and poor health in adulthood.
And that's so important to the conversation about, creating equitable communities, because again, that goes to the resources that are available. And, I think one of the comments before when we were talking about the health disparity, somebody said, there are a lot of, communities of color that, just can't walk into a doctor's office, whereas, other communities have that. Same thing, if you have children who are experiencing early childhood trauma, but they're in a community that there's no access to social workers or mental health counselors, or, there's a lot that goes to, again, that equitable community, making sure that we are putting the resources necessary where it needs to be so that they can address some of those issues. So,
and I would just add to that,
pointed that out so people don't think they just jump topics. No, ACEs are very important when you talk about creating equitable communities as well, because that is something that traditionally, historically, we have not tried to address. And so we need to make sure that we are addressing that, and access to the things that can address those ACEs are really important as well. So in our last few minutes, well, before I go to that question, someone talked a lot about social workers as well. And I want to go back to kind of some of the things I want to ask you, so in creating equitable communities, if you had like your wish list, and there were some things that you felt could happen or need to happen to help us, and we know, this wasn't created overnight. We're not going to solve it overnight, but we've got to be actively doing some things. So if you had your wish list, what are some of the top things that you would like to see to help us down the road to address racial inequities within our communities and creating those real positive outcomes for the children growing up?
So I'm really glad you asked that question, because a piece of research I just finished was asking current state legislators in South Carolina that very question. If you had a magic wand, what would you do about ACEs? And a lot of and these were both Democrat and Republican from all over the state. And a lot of their responses actually coincided with some of the suggestions that I would have. And so I thought I'd share some of those. So again, as you mentioned, there are many different ways we can go about this, right? Everybody has to play a role: the education sector, the mental health sector, the business sector, even in terms of hiring practices and flexibility for families, right? Those are things that we have to think about, all the way to, our more kind of traditional child welfare sector. So my wish list would be things like investing in more supports for first-time parents. So one of the things that research shows is that home visiting is a really great way to get new parents kind of up to speed. No one gives you a manual when you have a kid, right? So just having more of those supports available. I liked that comment that someone made that there is a lot of stigma. I think we can reduce stigma that way, which is that everybody has access to this, and it's up to you if you'd like to use it. And once it becomes a norm that it's okay to ask for help for parenting, you'll start to see a little bit of that hopefully change. Another thing, of course, is expanding a lot of different high quality childcare options. Because school readiness is an area, and I think someone else mentioned that is an area where we could intervene pretty early so that children have the opportunity to be in environments that are nurturing, even if that may not be the case at home, right? Because mom and dad are busy or working. They have other adults in their life that can really ensure they have everything they need. In an ideal system, I'd also like to see us reform some of our criminal justice policies to help parents be better reunified with their families. So I loved that City of Columbia did the ban the box. That is an equity policy, right? That is allowing people to re-enter the workplace in order for them to be able to support their family. I thought that that's a great way to kind of encourage some of that equity in the community. And then I think, again, speaking to some of the social workers, I think that, and we've heard this, teachers and educators are not in a model that's going to be able to sustain them to teach, but also be able to provide the support that so many kids need. And so really investing in social workers and mental health clinicians in schools, and people that are willing to help kids and connect with them is going to be important. And so one model of that actually is in Columbia as well. It is a resiliency team that has been created as a part of Resilient Richland, where there are 3 staff members that just go in to build those connections with kids that may be struggling in school. And they have seen some really great results. And of course, that takes money and investment to do things like that. So these are also some examples of things that legislators recommended as well, for those of you that are interested in hearing. But it was really exciting to see that legislators in South Carolina care about this issue and they want to do something about it.
That's good. Yeah. And that's encouraging as well. Because sometimes I even get frustrated. Sometimes I'm like, where are they living to not know some of these are issues? But yeah, we do have some amazing legislators too, who are always on top of these issues. So that is cool. So anyway, so in our last few minutes, I wanted to give you an opportunity, because when I read your bio, it said that you are now in the leadership of Empower SC. I've gotten to meet Rye and Demetrius, and I'm very impressed with both of these young ladies. So for people who don't know what Empower SC is, if you could just tell them what Empower SC and how they can get involved if they want to.
So Empower SC, I like to call, is a collective or a movement. We are very young. We're about 2 weeks old, but we have some brilliant people. I am forever inspired and impressed by the founders of this organization. It is a social justice organization that is focused specifically on this concept of equity, and equity for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And we say that intentionally because we also recognize that there are different types of people of color and different communities with different needs, even in the minority community. And so this organization really came out of wanting to have a policy change organization in response to some of the Black Lives Matter movements that we've seen in South Carolina and nationally, but also recognizing that change has to happen with collaboration. And change has to happen by working with our existing systems, our existing leaders, and really ensuring that we can work together for a common cause. And so we, again, are very new, but a lot of our policy focuses are on equitable policies for children and families as well, because we know, again, that if children are succeeding, then families and communities are succeeding. And so this really came out of some of the peaceful protests, specifically that happened. And so if you're interested in getting involved, we have several different ways to do so. We hope to have our website up in the next week or so, which explains our mission and vision, as well as how you can engage. But there's several different ways. Anytime you're starting an organization, we're always looking for help in terms of any guidance that you may have on how to start a nonprofit, as well as if you have any suggestions for who to connect with. So we have been so the city of Columbia has been awesome. We had an opportunity to meet with the mayor and the city manager just to learn more about the budgeting process. So how do we budget for different services in South Carolina, including our police department? And it was really, really interesting to also learn what some of the maybe barriers might be in the way. So one statistic that stuck out to me, and I hope I get this right, was Mayor Benjamin said that 70% of property on in the city limits are not on our tax payroll. And my face was like, but that's a unique challenge that City of Columbia has. We have some great businesses and nonprofits here, but that poses a significant challenge for not being able to maybe invest in things we want to invest in. And so these are the types of conversations we're having on Empower SC. So if you'd like to get involved, we have a Facebook group, as well as our email address is empowersouthcarolina@gmail.com. I check that email, Rye checks that email, and we will get you plugged in. We are looking for volunteers for policy, for communications, for community organizing, even legal support. So we welcome anybody that's interested. Thank you for letting me plug that.
No, well, thank you for what you do, and thank you for your time. It's been a great conversation. Like I said, I knew the hour would fly by.
Mm-hmm.
I'm shouting out, like I already said, we've got Shivani, Natalie, Regina, Chelsea. Hey, Chris Trainer. Chris Trainer says, quite the team up. Yeah. collaboration, like you just said, but important conversations that we as a community need to have and continue to have. And people keep asking, like, is this time different? And I think almost everybody I've talked to, especially every Black person I've talked to, has said it feels different.
Yeah.
We've been there, done that, seen that, heard that before, but this time feels different. And I think the reason it feels different is, for me, the conversations that I've been part of have been different. The conversations are not just you're doing this or this needs to happen or whatever. The conversations that I've seen have been about how can we work together. And then the biggest thing that I've been impressed about is people who don't know stuff have been saying, I don't know. Help me understand this. Help me explain this. And, I shared with somebody, if I have, I do not mind my white friends saying, please tell me if this is wrong. And I'm like, I love that, because, we have to recognize that we don't always know. And so I think this is different. And what I really hope is that not just do we acknowledge that there needs to be change, but everybody is willing to be the change that it sounds cliche, be the change they want to see, figure out their action items. And so, like I said at the beginning of this thing, guys, I hope there was something that you heard from this conversation that gives you an idea that said, this is something I can do. I can own this little piece. This is something I can do, whether it is talking about equity issues, learning more about what is inequity and how do you address it. Watching Paper Tiger and sponsoring a book group, or a viewing party and a discussion, or, there's so many things that could be an action item. So I hope that there is something that was heard that inspired you to, just be a part of learning more, doing more, and encouraging your friends to do more as well. But with that said, I would love, I think at some other time, hey, Georgia. I love Georgia as well. Georgia, I thought about you as well. I need to get you on here too, to talk about all you guys are doing at First Steps. And then I need to get Dom on to talk about investment in minority communities and how important it is to have a bank that invests in minority communities. So I got so many people I'm going to bring on here to talk to. But
thank you for doing this. To be able to have a local policymaker that's such a champion for open, honest discussions like this it's rare. And I appreciate that you bring on new voices that are willing to talk about hard issues. So this wouldn't be possible without you, Tameika. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I just appreciate, because I know everybody has lots of things to do, and evenings are not always all that great. I used to do it during the day when everybody was home, but then when people start going back to work, I was like, I need to do it at home. So I need to do it in the evening. But anyway, I appreciate you so much. Lastly, how can people get in touch with you if they want to know more, learn more, or support Children's Trust and what you guys do?
Absolutely. So I am on social media. I think my Facebook is here. You can connect with me there. I'm also, Chris Trainer would be proud, I am very active on Twitter now. So that's a good way as well. And it's just Aditi Srivastav for both of those. And then my email is my first name, last name, and I can actually maybe text this out. Aditi Srivastav 1031@gmail.com. Also, my name is unique enough that if you just Google it and South Carolina, you'll find my email address. But I'm more than willing to talk more about any of the topics that we discussed today. And I'm just really glad that people are plugged in and listening about this important issue of equity.
You said at 1030.com?
Aditi Srivastav 1031@gmail.com.
1031.
Yep.
All right. Okay. I'm going to put it here. Anyway. Well, Aditi, I appreciate you so much.
I know. This is so fun.
I owe you some social distancing camaraderie. We are neighbors. So.
Yeah, we didn't mention that. We're literally 3 doors down from each other, right. And we're being socially distanced. So everyone wear your masks and be socially distant.
Wear your mask. Oh my God. That's a whole nother show. But anyway, but thank you guys. And so anyway, for those of you who are watching, again, thank you so much. If you're watching the replay, still chime in. If you have any questions, we'll make sure you get your questions answered. But if you want to leave comments, again, share this so more people can be educated about how we all can work together to create equitable communities for children, where children can thrive. And stay tuned for our next few community conversations. I'm working on several ones. I've mentioned our police chief will probably come on pretty soon. I'm also working to get Adair Burrows, who is running for Congress, has some really good, her legal background is really what I want to talk about, because she has worked a lot with low-income communities about access to justice, which is not something we talked about with, you talked about criminal justice a little bit, but the access to the justice system for communities of color is another area where we're very inequitable. And so she's going to talk about that. So anyway, thank you guys so much for being here. Next time, good night. God bless. Wear your mask. Please stay safe. 1,700 people today, guys. We got to do better. We got to do better. And part of your action item can be wear your mask, social distance, wash your hands, and all that stuff too. So until next time, thank you guys for being here. Good night. God bless, and have a great evening.